As I've mentioned already, we have a really strong interest today in this topic of memory, specifically memory loss. It is Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and so I know this is a personally meaningful topic for many of us, and we're really grateful to make today's session available. And we're also really fortunate to have two incredible experts who are giving their time to be with us this afternoon, Dr. Pamela Dean and Dr. Joel Eppig. Dr. Dean is assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences in the School of Medicine at the University of Washington. She's also a board certified clinical neuropsychologist at the VA Puget Sound Medical System. And Dr. Joel Eppig is a clinical neuropsychology postdoctoral fellow also at the VA of Puget Sound. Dr. Eppig, Dr. Dean, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm going to turn it over to you, and I know you're going to share some content. And for everyone who's with us, know we do have time reserved at the end of the session where we'll be answering your questions. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you, Pam and Joel.
Thank you. It is our pleasure to be here today. This is something that Dr. Eppig and I really share a passion for talking about with community members about memory loss, what's normal, what's not. This is what we do on a daily basis, is evaluating these concerns and meeting with people such as yourself that come into our office. So it's really helpful to take a step back and really talk about what's normal, what's not, and answer your questions. So right now, what we're going to be going over is just kind of the overview of memory, how it works, how it doesn't work, what's normal, what's not, and then we'll be talking about optimizing healthy brain aging. I just like to give the caveat that, you know, any one of these topics, any one of these objective areas, we could probably speak about for an hour at least. So we're really just providing an overview of the information today. So please, again, feel free to use the chat feature if you have questions. Oops. So this is your brain. I don't know if you all can see my cursor here. This is the front. This is the back. It's as if you're looking from the side at somebody. And our brain has different lobes. And the different lobes have different responsibilities for things like language, problem solving, multitasking, memory, attention, vision, how we perceive things in space. So we know to move around a desk if it's in our way, or how to walk over something if it's in our way as we're moving. So our brain it looks kind of simple on top, but really it's very complex underneath. There are these rich connections underneath the surface. They're called white matter connections. I like to think of them as the highway of your brain. It allows for these very fast, speeded connections between areas in order for us to carry out the things that we need to do on a daily basis. We have that, oh, I need to go do this really quickly. Or if I'm thinking about something, I walk into a room, I need to go get something, I've got that action. Everything you're doing right now, sitting in front of this computer screen, hearing the information coming in, processing it, thinking about it, maybe associating it with your own thoughts, seeing it, all of this is what's going on with these colorful pieces of your brain. So how does our memory, oh, did it actually skip? No, okay, sorry about that. So how does our memory actually work? Our memory is actually very, very complicated. We have different types of memory, and they're involved in different regions of the brain or different parts of the brain. One part is our factual memory. We may also hear this referred to as declarative memory. That's the more technical term. This is recalling things like facts or experiences, basic knowledge. So how this comes into play is maybe knowing where you were on your 16th birthday, or knowing where you were when you heard that about the 9/11 towers being hit, how you remember learning about COVID, or what you had for breakfast this morning a couple hours ago. Where did you go on your last vacation? So it's remembering different facts about life, about history, your own personal experiences, and your own personal knowledge about events and worldly events. Then we have this other piece of our memory called procedural memory or motor memory. I always like to ask, How many strokes does it take to brush your teeth in the morning? And if anybody can actually answer that, I would be really interested to hear. We kind of just go on autopilot. When we get up, we get dressed. We're not really thinking about what we're doing. Another way, you may have heard, once you learn to ride a bike, you always know how to ride a bike. Or once you learn to play a musical instrument, you may be rusty if it's been some time, but you can pick it up and you can remember certain aspects of it. That's because of this muscle memory. So how our memory actually works, I like to think of this as a filing cabinet. We need a lot of different things in place for information to be able to come in or to learn that information. You need to have perception, either visual perception or auditory perception or tactile perception if you're blind. So you need to be able to take that information in. You have to have good attention to be able to attend to it. You need to be able to process that information, organize it, and put it into whatever kind of category it is. So it's going to be held in your filing cabinet. And then you need to be able to pull that information out when the time comes, whether you're meeting with your doctor, or you're having a conversation with your partner, or you're thinking about what we have coming up next week that we need to plan for, or what did we do last weekend? Who did we have dinner with? However it is, you're pulling that information out of your filing cabinet. Now, there are some things that can get in the way of this filing cabinet working efficiently. We can think of this as medical, neurological, and mental health. So we have medical things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, thyroid conditions, untreated sleep apnea, or inefficient sleep is another one. Now, hearing and vision loss is an interesting one. The research is really mixed because how we study it is a little bit of a confound at the same time. But what we know is that, again, thinking about the information coming into that filing cabinet, we need to have an efficient way to be able to perceive it. And if somebody is hard of hearing or deaf or blind or has low vision, that can impact how the information is coming in. We know that there's different neurological conditions that can also affect that filing cabinet. Obvious things like strokes, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, etc. Anything that affects the brain itself. But what we often don't think about is how mental health can affect the brain and cognitive health. Things like depression or anxiety. We've been in the midst of a global pandemic, which is increasing our stress in different ways that we maybe didn't even think about. Being under the same roof with our family members and not having our typical coping mechanisms to get out of the house and do the things that help keep us feeling good about ourselves. Other conditions like PTSD or bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, all of those can impact the efficiency in which your brain is working to remember information on a daily basis. Another one that's not often talked about or thought about is how chronic pain or chronic discomfort can affect cognitive health. If you remember in the beginning, I was talking about needing to have attention to be able to learn information to bring it into your filing cabinet. And what we see with any one of these conditions, either the mental health or the medical side in particular, is that can disrupt the attention, and that disrupts the flow of information coming in. I'm going to show you in a little bit what that can look like. Now, there's also some health behaviors that are associated with cognitive health, things like nutrition and diet. Now, we've all had a really greasy meal, something that's fried with some potatoes and lots of gravy, and then maybe we had some cheesecake afterwards. Think about how you felt after that big meal. Maybe a little sluggish, not firing on all cylinders. So diet and nutrition is actually really important to think about in terms of our overall cognitive health. Now, it's not to say that you can't have those things, but just to be aware of how it can impact you if you're having them every once in a while. And then also think about, Dr. Eppig's going to touch on this a little bit later in terms of overall health behaviors to help with healthy brain aging. Other things that can impact cognitive health, substance use. Now we're talking about more consistent intakes of alcohol, alcohol that reaches the level of a disorder, something that's more problematic, or misuse. Cannabis has been a hot topic now that it's legalized in this area and people are using it more to treat pain and mood and sleep. But we also know that this can affect cognitive health and how your memory and attention function as well. Certainly tobacco plays into those, what we call cardiovascular risk factors, or your brain health. What happens to your heart happens to your brain. Physical inactivity or physical activity is associated with your cognitive health. We touched on chronic stress already. And then sleep. I mentioned sleep apnea before, particularly if it's not being treated with a BiPAP or a CPAP. But overall sleep efficiency. If you think back to a time in which you were younger and pulled an all-nighter, or maybe your job calls for that now and you're a shift worker, and it's hard to feel rested when this is an ongoing pattern. And you start over time to feel like your gas tank is getting drained. And when your gas tank is drained, you can't think as clearly or as efficiently as before. This is another way to think about it. If we think about pieces of a pie or a pizza, and each of these different things that we've talked about represent that pizza. And I apologize if there's any vegetarians or vegans in our audience, since there's meat on here. But if you think about each of these representing a piece of that pie, and if you identify in this pie aspects of that, whether it's stress or mood or pain, each of those get pulled away. And you can see pieces of the pie that are left to function as your brain and to do the daily things that it needs to do. So going back to that filing cabinet that I mentioned earlier, we need good attention, good cognitive efficiency, good organization in order to file things into that filing cabinet to be able to pull them out later when we need them. But any one of those behavioral health conditions, lifestyle factors, medical conditions, mental health conditions, any one of those, and many of our patients have more than one of those things going on at a time, can disrupt that attention and that flow. And what you're left with is a very messy filing cabinet. How does this present to you on a daily basis? Well, the information might be in there, but what you're noticing in yourself or your loved one is absent-mindedness, more forgetfulness, that that's right. Or I said that 3 times. Why are you not remembering that? Oh, yes, that's right. You already told me this. It's in the filing cabinet, but it's harder to find. So I love this picture. Pretty sure roughly a third of my life has been spent standing in the middle of a room wondering what I came here for. I don't know about any of you, but that certainly resonates with me. We often walk into the middle of a room and go, why did I just walk in here? I was going to get something and I don't remember what that was. So it's actually very common. About a third of healthy older adults have some concern at one point or another about their memory. Now, we actually talk about this a little bit different. Many of you will come to us and it's a concern about your memory. But when it's that example of walking into a room and forgetting why you walked in there, it's actually an attention lapse. Your attention is kind of over here. And again, thinking about that filing cabinet, your attention went somewhere else and you can't pull out that file as to why you walked into the room. Then we've got the use it or lose it. You may have heard that term before. So the more you do something, the more likely you are to remember it. So I need to feed my dog every day. I'm not going to forget to feed my dog unless my schedule gets disrupted, and that might kind of throw me off. But it's pretty routine that I know I need to feed my dog and make sure that he has water. But what about the things that you do infrequently? How many of you cannot remember your passwords? I know that very often now with increases in technology, my phone has facial recognition. My passwords are automatically saved on my computer or my phone or my work, and I don't need to actually remember what they are. And then at some point, the technology fails, or you have to change your password, and it always asks you for your original password. But because we don't use it all the time, we now don't remember it. So it's that use it or lose it. So some other normal experiences of things that we can expect with normal cognitive aging: forgetting names or appointments every once in a while and remembering them later on. That tip of the tongue phenomenon. What is that word? What is that person's name? Oh, it's driving me crazy. I can't think of it. And then when you stop thinking, it finally comes to you, right? All of these different examples that I have here on this slide are things that happen occasionally. Every once in a while, you make a payment error. You accidentally paid something, you forgot to pay something, but it's not a consistent thing. Or you forgot how to work an appliance in your house. Again, use it or lose it. Something that you don't work routinely, and you go to use it and you can't remember how to use it. With the pandemic and many of us being at home and our work changing, or perhaps you're retired and you don't have that same schedule anymore, it's easy to forget what the day of the week is if you don't have anything kind of helping you remember that, like your favorite show that comes on Tuesday nights, or a certain event, or your work schedule. So getting confused of the day of the week every once in a while, if you don't have something to kind of pin up there, is normal. All of us lose our train of thought at one time or another. You're in the middle of a conversation and then all of a sudden you forgot what it was that you were going to say. How many of you can recognize or resonate with that, right? Misplacing things from time to time. I know that I am notorious for going to put something in a good, secure place that I will remember, but that it's safe. And it's so safe that sometimes, use it or lose it, a month or two later, I won't remember where I put it. So now we've talked about all the things that are normal experiences that can happen with typical aging. So now we're going to turn it over to what's not normal. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Eppig.
Thanks, Dr. Dean. Yeah, we're going to talk about some things that aren't normal with regard to memory and aging, and some things to look out for that can be helpful here. Next slide. There we go. Thank you. And so things to think about of when you might want to see your doctor for some follow-up and get some additional evaluation. And I've seen a number of questions coming in here as well, and just wanted to comment. We'll get to these at the end, but maybe touch on some of these as we talk about some of the next slides. But there's a lot of great examples here that we've listed of things to be a little bit more concerned about. So if you start noticing that you're having cognitive changes, forgetfulness that's starting to impact your daily life, that you're now consistently missing medications, you're starting to be unintentionally, late or missing bills without realizing those things. If there are concerns about ability to drive safely, for instance, these are things where they're starting, it sounds like, maybe to impact day-to-day life. And of course, if you miss your medications once in a blue moon or every now and then, that can happen to everybody. But if you start noticing this is happening on a regular basis, that's a little bit more concerning. If these are new problems or challenges that are going on, or they're happening more frequently, maybe you missed your medications once every other month in the past, and now it's happening several times a week, right? That's something that to be a little bit more concerned about. Challenges in problem solving, as well as certainly, if you're having difficulty with new tasks or activities, confusion, if you're confused what day of the week it is on a regular basis or what month. And these can be tricky, as Dr. Dean had mentioned earlier. If you're retired, you're not really paying attention to the date or day of the week on a regular basis. But maybe if you're confused about, if it's day or nighttime outside, those sorts of things are certainly more concerning. If you have changes in your ability to read or understand visual images, processing visual information, again, Something to be aware of. You might want to follow up with your doctor. If you're forgetting the meaning of common words, again, we all from time to time, are unable to pull up a word that we're thinking of in a conversation in the moment. That happens. But if you're finding that words that you're very familiar with, you're trying to pull it up, you can't get it out, and then it never comes back to you later either. That could be a bit more concerning. Would want to follow up with your doctor. If you're losing items and you're finding them in unusual places, right? You're going to look for the dishes and you would have thought you put them away from your dishwasher and you're finding them, in your cabinet in the living room, for instance, or, you're finding things in your freezer that don't quite belong in there. Again, those are things that are more concerning and would want to follow up and see your doctor there. If you're having changes in balance as well, we've been talking about memory and cognition as that's the focus of today's talk, but your balance and your motor functioning and your sensory functioning, as Dr. Dean had said early on, is all controlled by the brain. And these changes can often co-occur with changes in memory. If feeling suspicious of friends or family, that, thinking that they're stealing from you, they're taking things from you, if this is new, these are trusted individuals, and having some of these types of suspicions, might want to see your doctor about this. I just want to say this is not exhaustive. There are a number of explanations that could impact some of these types of concerns, and that's why it's important to follow up and get additional evaluation. There could be other concerns as well. But again, these are some things to be on the lookout for where it might be worth having some additional follow-up. Next slide.
And I just want to add one quick thing in here as I'm thinking about the medications themselves. One thing that I hear often is when somebody has never been on medication before, and all of a sudden there's some new medical problem that they are being treated for and have several medications to take, it can take some time to get used to that routine of putting those, taking those medications. Or if there's all these different rules about, take it an hour before you eat at this one, or this one you take with meals, or this one you have to take an hour after meals. All of those can contribute to challenges with taking medications and remembering to do it if that's a new thing that you're now incorporating into your life.
Yes. Yeah, great point, Dr. Dean. Thank you. And so we wanted to talk a bit here about conditions that don't reflect normal aging. Some of you may have heard this term dementia before. Are people familiar? It probably sounds pretty familiar to folks, seeing some head nods. Yeah. Dementia is an umbrella term, and what that means, it's on a spectrum. If you think of normal changes that occur with age over here, you have dementia on the other end of the spectrum here. And in the middle is this term mild cognitive impairment, which we'll get back to. And I think someone had actually asked a question about this. But dementia, what that means to us as providers, again, this is a label just to communicate information. But it means that someone's having a decline in their memory, cognition, or thinking abilities from a prior point, that decline represents a level of impairment, that they have some impaired cognitive functioning, which we can see on paper and pencil tasks if we have ways of assessing that, and that those cognitive impairments are impacting a person's ability to do what they need to do and function in the way that they need to in order to live their daily life. Okay, so that's this term dementia here. We've talked about normal aging on this other side, and in the middle we have this term called mild cognitive impairment. And what that means is a person is having that decline, they're concerned about some changes in their thinking abilities, and that there might be objective evidence of impairment on paper and pencil tasks, but that's not necessarily impacting their ability to do what they need to do and function in the world in the way in which they need to on a day-to-day basis. And so folks that have this diagnosis of MCI, as we call it, are at increased risk to continue to develop cognitive problems that can impact their daily functioning or develop dementia in the future, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. So if you have this diagnosis, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll develop dementia in the future, but you're at a higher risk of developing that. And thus it's helpful to follow those folks over time. As I said earlier, dementia is an umbrella term. So it really describes someone's symptoms of what's happening. It doesn't describe necessarily the underlying cause or pathology that's contributing to those changes in the brain. And so you can think of it like the term cancer, right? You have cancer as this umbrella term, and then there's a number of other types of cancer underneath, right? You have breast cancer, you have prostate cancer, lung cancer, and so forth, right? These different pathologies contributing to cancer. So you have dementia as this umbrella term, and then you have Alzheimer's disease, which most folks have probably heard of, I'm going to guess. That's very well-known term, of course, at this time. But there's a number of other pathologies that can actually contribute to dementia. So vascular dementia is a very common one as well. Your heart health, as we'll talk about, directly impacts your brain health. There's one called Lewy body dementia, which is related to some of the similar pathology that occurs in Parkinson's disease. There's a separate type of dementia called Parkinson's disease dementia. There's some other more rare ones, frontal temporal dementias, Huntington's disease is listed on here, as well as a number of others. Again, the most common that folks have probably heard of here, Alzheimer's disease dementia, this vascular dementia, and then the Parkinson dementias. All right, next slide, Dr. Dean. Thank you. And so we wanted to share here an example of some of the changes that occur when someone has, one of these diseases. So here we have Alzheimer's disease, and there are clear changes that we can see that occur in the brain. There's a number of different ways we can measure these things. One is we can take a snapshot, right? I'm sure folks have heard of CAT scans or MRIs. This is an MRI here. And just to orient folks, this is a section of the brain. If you sort of peel someone's face back, you're looking at it this way, head on. You're looking at someone head on. You have their brain here. And there's a particular area in the brain called the hippocampus. That means, it's a Latin word. They named all these different brain regions with Latin words to make them confusing and difficult to remember. But an easy way to remember is it means seahorse, because if you actually pull this particular area out of the brain, it looks like a seahorse. And that's why they named it that. And you can see on the right panel here, there's an individual that's a healthy individual, right? And this area in red, and our brain doesn't have this red color in it, that's put in after the fact. But there's this area in red, that's the hippocampus, and it's nice and full, right? It looks very large. There's very little space between it and the rest of the brain surrounding it. And then if you look at the panel on the left, you'll see an individual with Alzheimer's disease has that same structure in the brain, the hippocampus, but it actually looks quite a bit smaller, right? And you can see right above the red, there's this sort of dark region, right? And that's actually space in the brain as that hippocampus has started to shrink, and that fills with a fluid that we have there. And so there's ways, again, we can measure some of these changes that are occurring in the brain. And this is just one example with an MRI. There are other ways we can measure that as well. And we'll go to the next slide here. I want to talk a little bit about vascular health, and we can also image this as well. So this is, again, this is your brain you're looking at, but this is a top-down slice. This is if you're standing over someone and you have a cut this way. And so we said earlier that your heart health directly impacts your brain health. As folks are probably aware, right, your heart supplies blood, nutrients, oxygen, all of those things that are critically important for your brain function to your brain. And so if you have conditions that impact your vascular or heart health, they can start to impact your brain as well. And we can start to see those changes if we image them. If you look on the far left panel here, you'll see what's referred to as some mild changes that are occurring in the brain. And these typically occur in that white matter that Dr. Dean referred to earlier. On the bottom panel there, you can see on the top panel, it's not filled in. On the bottom, it's been filled in with the color red just to highlight some of those changes. And so if some individual has some mild changes associated with cerebrovascular health, you might see a little bit of this capping here around this dark space, which is, again, this fluid in your brain. Right, it's very, very small, not very noticeable, kind of would need a trained eye to see that. And then as we move rightward across these panels, you'll notice there's a lot more red that's showing up. And of course, this corresponds to some of these white matter changes that you can see on the corresponding panel above. If you go all the way on the right, as Dr. Dean's pointing out, right, there's a lot of that red that you're seeing. And again, these are changes that are occurring in the white matter of the brain, that information superhighway, as Dr. Dean said earlier, that are very sensitive to your vascular health and are very, very important. So this is one way that we can look at changes that are occurring in your brain as people are getting older to help rule out things like Alzheimer's disease, vascular causes, and so forth. We have other ways as well, and we wanted to talk about medical workup and evaluation. Again, we mentioned earlier, if you have some concerns about your cognition, some things to look out for. So what can you actually do if you do have these concerns? First of all, we would recommend that if folks have concerns about themselves or family members, friends, so forth, encourage them to follow up with your primary care doctor. If you already have a neurologist or a psychiatrist, perhaps, be great to talk with them. Many folks may not have that though. So start with your PCP and they will be able to refer you to the appropriate sort of next steps. And they'll do an examination with you. They might look at your motor functioning and your sensory functioning, do some different tasks with you there to see if there's anything in particular that they might notice that might point out different areas of the brain that could be affected and different conditions that can be going on. One thing to note about dementia, it's kind of tricky in that there's no blood test, right? You can't do a blood draw and say you have dementia, you don't have dementia, right? Something like that. And so it's actually a condition that we have to rule out, meaning that there's a number of different things that can impact the brain, factors, reversible causes, and so forth. And so your doctors will do all these evaluations and examinations to make sure that these reversible factors aren't in fact what's causing those challenges. And then once we rule all those out, then we look at some other things and can make some inferences and say, yeah, we think this might be dementia or mild cognitive impairment or so forth. So what are some helpful questions to think about? If you're going to your doctor, as I'm sure people are aware of these days, it's often helpful to write down some questions and thoughts you might have beforehand, and that can really help guide them as well as yourself, right? In terms of the information you want to provide, making sure that you remember things to ask. So thinking about what are the specific concerns, what are you actually having difficulty with? Are these things that are happening just now and again, maybe just losing things, or are they really impacting your day-to-day functioning? Are you having problems taking your medications, your bills, or concerns about driving, or so forth? Are these new concerns? Have they been going on a long time? Did they start gradually? Did they start suddenly, right? Have they been getting worse over time? Perhaps they've been about the same, or maybe they've even been getting better. Or have they been fluctuating, right? Thinking about all of those different aspects. And then thinking about things in your own personal health history. Do you have perhaps medical conditions, that are untreated or haven't been well controlled that might need to be looked at, or talking about those with your doctor? Things like mental health conditions, again, that might be untreated. Or, again, we've been living in a pandemic for 18 some months at this point, right? This has a huge effect on folks' stress, their mental health, emotional distress. Things like depression, anxiety are very common in these types of stressful situations. These can have a massive impact on your day-to-day thinking skills. And you might start to notice when you're feeling a bit down, that has a big impact on your thinking abilities. Or I'm sure everyone's had the experience where you didn't get quite enough sleep the night before, right? You didn't get a good night's sleep, and man, you feel foggy the next day, right? Again, sleep being very, very critical to your health. Well, that's a really important connection to notice, right? And maybe there's something going on with your sleep and your doctors could help you with that. Or maybe, again, Dr. Dean's talked about diet being another, a number of other lifestyle considerations, physical activity, all of these things can have a huge impact. And so thinking about those and what might be contributing. And so we wanted to talk about healthy brain aging here, what you can do to actually optimize your brain health. And you have quite a bit of control. In fact, all of these things are various factors that you can influence. And you can start at any age making positive changes in your life that will help optimize your brain functioning. There are a number, and I think I saw some questions here around this too, a number of different supplements that you'll see marketed. You might see, you know, in the your local CVS or Walgreens or Rite Aid or what have you, or on TV. I've certainly, and Dr. Dean as well, has worked with a number of folks that have questions about these. You know, we would just want to point out that, first of all, many of these supplements are very poorly researched. There's no evidence that these you know, change someone's cognition or have a huge effect, or often they have very bold claims and they're not really supported by the science. They can also have unknown or unclear substances, and that can interact with other medications you may be taking and have adverse effects. So again, before starting any new medications or supplements, would talk with your doctors first, as you wouldn't want to have any negative side effects there. And even if you your doctor said you weren't going to have any side effects, again, just keeping in mind, these are companies trying to take your money, right? They're being marketed in a very particular way. And so just being cognizant that there's not a lot of strong research to support these. And then finally, we wanted to talk about some things that you know, could be helpful here. The FDA has approved, until the beginning of June, they've approved a number of medications that were symptomatic for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, and many of these have been used off-label by doctors for other cognitive conditions for many years. They don't necessarily, you know, stop or prevent changes related to Alzheimer's disease, for instance, but they do treat symptoms. And they can have some modest effects on cognition. And you can see there's a whole range of them I'm sure you've heard of, Aricept probably being the most famous there below. And they've been approved for mild to severe Alzheimer's disease. But as I said, they're often used off-label by prescribers for other reasons. And then there's more recently the FDA, and I'm sure people that, you know, follow the news sort of saw these headlines, about 3 weeks ago approved a new medication for Alzheimer's disease called Aduhelm. Very controversial. I would just say that the science, the data does not necessarily support some of the bold claims that are being made. And there are, you know, there's serious side effects. There's a lot of potential for these. It hasn't even been approved by Medicare yet, or insurers, so this would all be out of pocket. It's quite expensive. I think the last figure I saw was something like $56,000. That's just for the medication alone. Because of the potential for side effects, a number of these folks have to have ongoing MRI monitoring to make sure that they don't develop these types of things. That has its own costs associated with it. So that is to say, if you know you have concerns or you're interested or would like to know more, you know, follow up with your doctors about this, because again, it's very controversial right now. All right, and we just wanted to stop here and leave you with some take-home points. I know we've gone through this information very quickly, and hopefully we can answer some questions. But there are normal age-associated changes that occur that can impact your memory. And it's important to be aware of those, as well as other things that can reflect non-age-associated changes. Health and lifestyle factors have a huge, huge impact on your thinking abilities. And this is an area you have a lot of control over and can make a big difference in optimizing your cognition. It's never too late to start trying some of these things. And again, if you have concerns about your memory, or if it's, you know, interfering with your day-to-day functioning, we would recommend you follow up with your doctors for additional evaluation, and just be aware of any you know, marketing scams or things like that.
I also just want to give a plug to, you know, something that we have access to right here, which is the UW Memory, Brain, and Wellness Center. They are an excellent resource that has multidisciplinary care for evaluation of cognitive concerns related to these different conditions we've been discussing today, like different kinds of dementia. And then there's also a lot of programs that are going on in and around the community. And again, UW Memory, Brain, and Wellness Center has an excellent website that can direct you to some different programs that are taking place not only there in-house, but also in and around the local Seattle area for somebody that has early stage memory loss, that allows them to engage. And I have to apologize to Dr. Eppig because I accidentally advanced the slide when we were talking about brain health and I couldn't get it to go back. We kind of breezed through that one very quickly, but social engagement is really important for optimizing brain health, particularly for people who don't have cognitive dysfunction and for those who do have some type of diagnosed cognitive dysfunction. We want to keep you connected. We want you to realize that you are not alone in this journey and that there are others who are experiencing similar changes and caregivers that are also out there that are experiencing similar changes. And so it helps to connect you so you don't feel so alone. So with that, I believe we can start taking some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Dean and Dr. Eppig. That was amazing. And you've generated a lot of questions from participants. I'm very happy to walk through them and toss them out to you and you can respond. I'm trusting the two of you to field whatever is you want to field. We'll start at the top. The first question, very timely. How can something like maybe an extreme heat wave affect memory?
That's a great question. If we think again about that filing cabinet, if you're not sleeping really well, I know with this horrible heat, I've not been sleeping really well the last couple of days and I'm feeling very fatigued and tired. So if you have a strong foundation, meaning you don't have any cognitive impairment, you are likely to just not feel your best, feel more sluggish. Again, when you're not sleeping well, I saw another question in there about what does inefficient sleep mean? And that's just, when you're waking up throughout the night, whether or not you're aware or not, tossing and turning with this heat, you can't get comfortable. It affects that attention and cognitive speed and efficiency. And so it disrupts that filing cabinet for getting information in and then being able to pull it out after. So you might feel more absent-minded. And if somebody has cognitive dysfunction, a diagnosed either MCI or mild cognitive impairment or dementia process, that's likely to be even more magnified because their foundation has already some cracks in it, so to speak. And it's already hard for them to recruit those resources that are so necessary that we get from well-rested sleep. Dr. Eppig, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think you covered it very well.
There's another question related to sleep. And someone asked, is long-term sleeping pill use for better sleep more harmful to cognition, or is not getting enough sleep more harmful?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's a number of different sleeping pills. And so I'm not sure exactly what they're referring to, but there's a number of prescription ones that can have side effects that can impact your thinking abilities and medications. And if the individual's taking those and that's the case, again, I'd talk with your doctor about that and alternatives. There's some other over-the-counter things like melatonin that folks might take to help fall asleep. These would certainly have far less of an impact on your thinking abilities. But certainly not getting enough sleep, not just not getting enough, but if you're having problems falling asleep, if you're having problems staying asleep, right, you're waking up multiple times throughout the night rather than having that nice 7 to 9 hours, you're taking little chunks like that, that's going to have a huge impact on your thinking abilities. And that can take a while to get your sleep in a pattern that's working for you if you're having challenges with sleep. So again, follow up with your doctors and work through that process.
The other thing to think about with sleep is that as you go to sleep, your brain waves change and you get into deep restorative stages of sleep. That's really the ideal place for us to sleep. So if you are taking certain medications, again, depends on if it's at the beginning or the middle or where you're having difficulty, if it's prescribed versus over the counter, et cetera. The more important question is, are you getting to the deep restorative stages of sleep? to help you consolidate information in your day and to help your brain function optimally. If you have questions about that, there are sleep studies that are available, and you can follow up with that to maybe learn more about what's getting in the way of your sleep. And then there's a funny word called sleep hygiene, and it offers different techniques for you to look at some of the different things that you might be doing in your day that you're not even realizing, like maybe exercising too late in the day and it's making it hard for you to fall asleep, or having a glass of wine. You might feel like it helps you to fall asleep, but it kind of has a rebound effect and you're waking up earlier and it's not allowing you to get sustained sleep. So a lot of different things that can get in the way of sleep.
Great. There's a couple of questions that have come up around assessment and assessing cognitive ability and cognitive impairment. And the first is whether there is any way to assess a baseline to then assess, impairment over time.
Absolutely. This is what we do. This is what Dr. Eppig and I do as clinical neuropsychologists. Now, there's different ways to do this. If a good starting place, again, is with your doctor that knows you really well, whether it's a primary care physician or a psychiatrist that you see regularly, or if you're already engaged in neurological care, they can do a cognitive screener, which is a very brief test of your cognitive abilities. It's kind of like taking somebody's temperature. It lets us know if there's maybe some concern, or even if it's a normal score, if there's concern from you or your doctor, they might then refer you on to us. And we do a much more thorough evaluation that can take several hours, but it's very much engaged with you. And we're doing different things back and forth, and the time passes very quickly. But it allows us to get a much more in-depth idea of what you're doing. We have the brain picture from the brain imaging, and now we have the actual functional abilities. And I like to think of neuropsychological evaluations as putting pieces of a puzzle together. We take the information from your medical background, medications that you're taking. We do an in-depth evaluation of your mental health, your sleep, your pain, all those different things we've been talking about that can impact your cognitive health. We look at any lab tests that have been done, any specialists you may have seen, and then we do our evaluation. And we put it together like pieces of a puzzle. And we may just be able to have baseline information, and then we can redo this again another year and a half or two or more, depending on the question. Or it may allow us to see that there's some red flags, and then where do we want to direct your care from there, and what other specialists might be helpful to engage at that time. Did you have anything else to add, Dr. Eppig?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is exactly what we do, and there are a lot of options. If you have concerns, seeing your doctor and getting a baseline evaluation, we can definitely do that. That can be done to compare change over time, and that's really, really helpful.
And if someone hasn't done some baseline assessment, then how might a family member know if someone with mild cognitive impairments is going beyond the mild stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, coming back to those terms, dementia and mild cognitive impairment, and thinking about this as a spectrum, right, with normal aging on one end, when you start to see changes in someone's ability to live independently, to do what they need to do on a daily basis and function in the world in the way in which they need to, missing medications that they need to take that are important for their health, being late. We gave finances, bill paying as an option, or as an example, excuse me, missing appointments with their doctors or others, right? These types of things. If there are concerns around driving safety, right, that would start to suggest that maybe this is impacting their day-to-day life, and would want to get follow-up to make sure this isn't just mild cognitive impairment. Dr. Dean, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I did. One of the questions we often get is, how do we know what a baseline is for somebody when we've never met them before? And one of the things that our evaluations do, we have these things called hold measures. They're things that are well ingrained in your brain that you learn from a very early age, that even with they don't start to decline until the more advanced stages of dementia. So it gives us an idea as to where we think somebody should be functioning. And then we can use that to help us understand the rest of their profile if their scores are, maybe they're at the lower end of the average range and that's how they've always been, and this is not representing a decline for them, versus somebody who we expect maybe, functioning at the very high end. And now we're seeing scores that are, at the lower end of the average range or below that, that may signal a decline. So this helps us to be our gauge to understand someone when we've never met you before.
A question on brain health. Someone asked, is there any evidence that brain games or puzzles, Sudoku and word search, do those things help?
That's another great question. I'm loving these questions in the chat. I wish we had time to get to every single one of these. These are awesome questions. So my apologies if we don't get to your question. That's a great question. The research is really mixed, and it doesn't suggest that it transfers over to daily activities. But what it does do is, if you find it fun and engaging, it can give you something to do. It can increase your self-efficacy because you feel challenged and successful in doing it. So I would say that as long as it's not something that you're having to pay for, or that you're really kind of putting all of your eggs in one basket, if you're doing it because it's fun and engaging in some other ways, then go for it. But kind of, going in eyes wide open. It doesn't translate. Uh-oh, I see somebody really excited about that. It doesn't translate into more generalized support for cognitive functioning. But, from the other side of it, we can see improvements in self-efficacy and mood because it's fun and you feel a sense of accomplishment in doing it. Dr. Epic, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, and just being aware of marketing. That's a common theme you're probably hearing at this point.
I know we're all very sad we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions today. I guess Dr. Dean and Dr. Eppig, are there any kind of summary thoughts that you want to share? Or are there any things that have jumped out to you in the chat that that your presentation didn't touch upon that may be helpful to share a few words about before we wrap up?
There were two things that I thought I wanted to comment on. One was a question about, is like brain shrinkage normal with aging? And to some extent, yes, and to some extent, no. As we age, the brain does shrink a little bit. And when you have brain imaging done, the neuroradiologist will generally comment if the atrophy or shrinkage is typical for someone's age. They have those different markers. And then there's what goes beyond typical or normal aging. And that's where someone might come and see us when it kind of crosses over that threshold. And then the other one I wanted to touch on was hearing loss. Does this cause dementia? Again, the research is very mixed in this. The measures that are most sensitive to understanding dementia are verbal word lists. And if somebody has hearing loss, the research has tried to take that out of the mix. And so it kind of weakens the research in some way. So the direct relationship, hearing is related to the brain, yes. But the direct relationship to does it increase the risk of dementia is really still not clear. But what we do know is it can, with late onset hearing loss, it can impact how information comes in and then is processed and then remembered, which can then give the perception of forgetfulness or memory loss. Dr. Eppig, were there any questions that stood out for you?
Yeah, someone asked a great question, I think, while we were talking about Alzheimer's disease and dementia, about can we do things before we reach that point? Can we prevent this, prolong it starting, and so forth? That's an excellent question. That's literally the $1 trillion question that drug companies have been looking into for a long time now. But we know there are a number of things, and coming back to those lifestyle factors, and we went through that slide very quickly, but things like social engagement, right? Getting proper sleep, thinking about your diet. I don't know if folks have heard of a Mediterranean diet before. It's what people live around the Mediterranean Sea tend to eat. It's high in things like oils, legumes and nuts, vegetables, fruits, not many processed foods, not a lot of red meat and so forth, right? These things can have a huge effect on your thinking, and particularly the earlier you start, certainly the better. again, we've talked about mental stimulation, games and things of that nature. We've touched on social connection. I think is a big one for folks right now for very obvious reasons. Over the last 18 months, it's been a real challenge to get that social connection. But everyone's here today on a Zoom call, which is awesome. Love to see that. And so clearly, folks are trying to seek those opportunities out, and hopefully, as things continue to move in a positive direction, we'll resume to more normal activity. And then physical activity being a huge one. I don't really like the word exercise. There's a certain connotation, right, of like being in the gym, bench pressing 400 pounds or something of that nature. But physical activity has a huge impact on the brain through our vascular health, really. And again, our heart directly impacts our brain. And so that can look all kinds of ways. Taking a walk with your partner when it's not super hot out, or gardening, maybe parking a little bit farther away from the grocery store, right? So that you have to walk a little bit farther, taking the steps instead of the elevator, thinking ways that you can get that little bit of extra physical activity. Again, all of these changes, particularly when you start to add them up, can have a cumulative effect that really reduces risk. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict what will happen 20, 30 years, 10 years necessarily down the road, but we do know that, working or trying to change some of these lifestyle factors can have a very big impact on minimizing risks to develop cognitive problems as we get older. So I really just can't highlight this slide enough. And that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
We are at 2:59. So unfortunately, I know there are more questions and we're not gonna be able to get to them all today. Your comments in the chat are very helpful to us. It helps us plan to do future webinars and know what topics are going to be meaningful to folks in the UW community. For everyone who's here today, you will get a link to the video if you want to go back and pay closer attention to anything that we talked about. And you'll also get a copy of the slides. In the next few days, you'll also get an email from the whole U that asks you to share feedback. And please use that to give us some ideas and to provide feedback to Dr. Dean and Dr. Eppig. Again, I can't thank the two of you enough. We are so lucky at UW to have such amazing colleagues and resources, and your time to educate us is really important. So thank you. And thanks to everyone who made time for being here. Take good care.